Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this Django for Beginners tutorial series, we're creating a blog-style web application with functionality for users to sign up, log in, and the ability to create, read, edit, and also delete different blog posts. Now, this is not the first video in this series. We've already done 3 before in which we've covered a basic introduction of Django. We've completed the setup of our Django application, and I already showed how you can work with your database inside of our Django project. So until now, our progress has been good. But whenever we start our server, the output that we see on the screen is still this install of Django that has worked successfully. However, we want to make sure that the users can see the content that we actually want to show them on these pages. And that is what we're going to be doing in this video, because we're going to be creating different pages, and I'm going to show you how you can navigate between those pages so that the user sees the correct output based on the URL. Now, to realize that, we will be following 6 steps. We're going to start with a basic explanation of the process of creating pages, which includes URLs, a view, and a template. Then we're going to get started, and we're going to start by creating a template folder in our project and then creating the first templates, views, and URLs so that we can see the output in our app. Then I'm going to show you how we can navigate to different pages and also how we can avoid writing duplicate code by creating something called a base.html file. As a last step, we will be implementing that base.html file inside of our project so that we can effectively display content to our users. So let's get started with a small introduction on how we can create a page that is visible for the user. Every page you create within Django requires 3 different things. For every page, we need to define a URL in our urls.py file, and that is going to define the actual web address where something is located. So we need to define which URL in the browser the user gets to use to see the content. And in that urls.py file, we also need to define what view belongs to that URL. Now that brings us to the second thing that we need to create, which is a view. Now, a view is located in your views.py file, and it defines the logic of what needs to happen when the user does different actions on the page. So if the user clicks a button, then the view takes care of the logic in the background. And the view also makes sure that it's connected to a template. And also, if we want to pass data from our database to the page, we can define what we want to show on the page in our views.py file. Now, the last thing that we will also need is an HTML template. And the HTML template shows the exact content for the user. So in there, we can show different components and define exactly what the page needs to look like. And this is the actual page the user will see in the browser. So for each page we want to create, we need one of each. So if we're going to be creating a home page, we need to define one URL in the urls.py file, one view in the views.py file, and create a template. Now you will see inside of our project, if we go to the post folder, that we have a file for the urls.py, and we also have a file for the views.py. So in there, we can define the content that we need to create pages. However, we don't have a place in our project yet where we have defined all of the HTML files that we will have in our project. So let's get started and create that location so we can create the first pages in our app. So inside of our posts folder, I'm going to be creating a new folder. And that folder, which you can create with this icon right here, is going to be called templates. And then inside that templates folder, I'm going to be creating another folder, and that folder needs to have the same name as the folder that's in. So in this case, it's going to be called posts. And now inside of this posts folder, we can create the HTML pages that we would like to see. So let's start by creating a home page for our app. So to do that, we would go to this new file option, and we would say that this is the home.html file. And in this file, we can write all of the components that the user needs to see when landing in a certain page. Now, the content of an HTML page is always structured in the same way. And to get that boilerplate structure ready without typing it all over, you can do an exclamation mark and then do a tab. And this will create a very standard HTML structure that you can use right out of the box. So let's explain this structure briefly. You don't really need to know this in too much detail, but let's cover it anyway. So at the top, it defines that this is an HTML page and also that the document type is HTML. And that is because we obviously are writing in that format. Then there is a clear distinction between two different things on this page. The first thing is inside of the head. And these are just details about our page. So this is not about the actual content that you see, but more about the additional things. So for example, we have a few settings right here that define the width and the scales. And we can also see a title. And this is the actual name of the page. So we can change that as well to home. Now, on the bottom part, you have something called body. And the body is the actual content that we will see on the page in the end. So if I want to add another component, so let's say that we do a div, which is nothing more than a simple container which can contain some text or some styling. And we say, welcome to the home page. Then this text will pop up on the page whenever we get there. Okay, so we now have an HTML file ready here. But of course, if we want to display this homepage to the user, we also need to create a view and a URL. So let's get started first with a view. Now all of the views you will define in the views.py file. And in here, we can define different views for the different pages. So let's create a view for our homepage. Now we always do that by first do def, and then we say that it is home. And home is simply the name of the view. Then we always put in request, because we need that in order for it to work. And then we do a colon, and in there we can define what our view contains. Now, as a minimum, the view always needs to contain a few things. The first thing that we always define is the context. And context are all of the things that we want to bring to the template. So let's say that at the beginning of this view, I define that the title is equal to this is my title. Then we can define that we want to bring title to our home.html page by saying that title is going to be equal to title. So next to the context, which tells us a little bit about what we want to bring from our backend to the HTML page, we also need to provide what we will be showing to the user. And we do that by defining return render. And in there, we need to put request and then the link to our template. So the actual template that we have just created, because that's what we want to display to the user. So we're now connecting our view to the actual template that we've just created. Now in here, we need to reference to this location. And this location is actually equal to posts/home.html. Because inside of our templates, we have a folder called posts, and in there we have the file called home.html. Now the last thing that we also want to bring to this front end is the context. So we do a comma, and in there we say context. And that will make sure that whatever we have defined in the context is also brought to the home.html file. And let's save this. So as a minimum, this is what we need to define to make sure that it will all work. But the last thing that we're missing is on what web address we can actually find this. Now, to make sure that we have that, we can go to the urls.py file, because here we can define all of the URLs of our project. Now, to create this URL, we start with path. Now, inside of this path, we need to define a few things. The first thing is the actual URL where we want the user to look at. So in this case, since it is our homepage, I just want it to look at the base URL. So I want this page to show the homepage. To do that, we can just do this. Next, we also need to include the view that is going to be attached to this URL, because the view connects to the template, but the URL needs to connect to the view. So let's start with importing that view. And we do that by doing from posts import views as views. So we import everything from our views and we name it views. So then we can say that our path, which is just the default path, needs to show the view called views.home. And we can also give it a name, and we can call that home. So now whenever we refer later in our template to home, it will always know that this is the URL that is associated with it. So let's save that. So how this now works is that our URL of simply the base URL is referring that we are going to display the views.home. And in the views, which is called home, we refer that we want to show something in the home.html template. And that is how it's all being connected. So let's now check out the result in the browser. So if we now refresh this page, you can see that we have welcome to the home page. And that is exactly the content that we've also put in our home.html page. Now what you can also see right here is that the title on the top is stating home. However, what we can change this to is, for example, our blog post app. And let's save that. And now if we refresh this page, you will notice that the title is changed to our blog post app. So everything in the head part is going to affect this, and everything in the body part is going to affect this. So now we have this first one down, we can actually create another page. So let's create a page dedicated to blog posts. So I've copied over the home.html file, and we can rename this to blogposts.html. And then we say welcome to the blog posts page. And let's save that. And now we can also create another view, which we can then call blog posts. And actually, let's not have a title right here. And also let's leave the context empty for now. And then in the return render, we need to define that we want to not show the home.html, but the blog posts.html file. Let's save that. And now as a last step, we can go to our urls.py file, and we can state that the path of blog posts needs to display the view of blog posts, and that we want to name this blog posts. So if we go to the browser and we now go to /blog posts, you will notice that it now says welcome to the blog post page because we are now in another URL. So that is how this all works in the background. Now, of course, what you want to do is not constantly change this URL so that the user can see the home page. And then if we go to /blog posts, we can go to the blog post page. We actually want to navigate to it from this screen. So let's show you how that works. So let's say that we're now on the blog post page and we want to create a link that brings the user automatically to the home page. We can create a new component in the HTML file here with an A tag, because an A tag represents a link. And then in there, we can define where we want the link to go to. So inside of this A tag, we can say that href is equal to, and then some colons. And then we can state with some curly brackets and 2 times a percentage where we want to go to. So in here, we can state that we want to go to URL, and that URL is called home. And now inside of this A tag, so in the middle, we can say that this is the link to go to home. And this is just the text that is being displayed as a link. Now, the reason that we can call this home is because in the urls.py file, we have defined the name as home. But it also means if we go to blog posts and we copy over this link and we go to the home page and also put it in there, we can change this link to blog posts because that is also the name specified in the urls.py file. And then we can say a link to go to blog posts. And let's save that. And now when we go to the page and we refresh the page, you can see that on the blog post page, we have a link to go to home, which goes to home. And then on the home page, we have a link that goes to the blog posts. And that is in a very basic way how this works. Now, one of the final things that we will notice inside of our home and blog post page is that a lot of the code is very similar, because this top part for the head and also the HTML tags are exactly the same in the home page as in the blog post page. The only real difference is in this piece of content that we display. Now, of course, we can keep on copying over these pieces of code However, that's quite inconvenient because every time that we want to change something, we need to change it in all of the files. Now, a very easy solution for that is creating a base.html file. Now, a base.html file allows us to store all of the shared code across multiple files in one file. And we can then extend that to the other files so that we don't need to repeat the code. What we can do right here is create a new file in our posts folder, and we're going to be calling that base.html. Now in this base.html file, we want to have all of the repeating code that you see in blog posts and in the home.html file. So what we will do is we go to the blog post page and we will just copy over everything that we see right there, put it in the base.html file. And then we're going to be replacing the unique things that we want to display on the pages and just delete it and say that we want to create a new component, which is going to be a div. And inside of this div, we are going to say that we want to block the content, which we do like this, and then say block content. And let's make sure that I type this correctly. And we will also put another tag, which is quite similar, and we call this end block without the content. Now, what this will represent is the unique codes that we will have in the blog posts and in the home.html files, so that this can reside all in one file. And this part is what will be unique across of these other files. So to make sure that this all works correctly and that this is all standard code from the base template and this is the unique code from the different pages, we also need to make a small change to the other HTML files. So what we can do on the blog post.html file right here is we can get rid of anything that is not unique. So everything from the body upwards and everything from the body downwards, so that we only have the div and the a tag right here. Now, to make this work and also display what is on the top and the bottom of the base.html file, it's quite straightforward. On the top, we can say that we want to have some curly brackets and some percentage signs. And in there, we say extends and then blog / base.html. So now it knows that we want to extend the blog.html page with the new content that we have on this page. Now, all that we need to define now is where that extension takes place. And in this base.html file, we have created a block for content and an end block. So we also need that in the blog posts.html file. So we can put block content on the top, so where our different content is going to start. And we're going to put the end block of the content on the end of the page. So what this will do, it will take all of the content from the base.html file and it will place our unique content in the body, which is indicated with the block and the end block. So here it will display this in the place of this. And that makes sure that we don't need to repeat ourselves with the code. So we can do the same thing now for the home.html file. So also there, let's just copy this over from the blog posts and put it on the top of the file of the home.html file. And let's also get rid of the body and the HTML. And then we can put the block content on the top and the end block of the content on the bottom. And let's also make sure that we save the blog post.html file. Now this should also make sure that we don't see anything different. So if we refresh the page, we actually see that we made a small mistake because for some reason I named this blog / base.html, but this should be posts. So we change it to posts, and let's also do that in the homepage where we put it as posts. And now when we refresh this, you can see that we see the homepage the same as before. And if we go to the blog post, we also see it as the same as before. And this makes sure that we can put some high-level settings in the base.html file, and we don't need to apply that everywhere else. And that is actually all for this video. In this video, I showed you how we can create different pages in our app and how we can navigate from page to page. And we also showed you the concept of creating a base.html file. Now, of course, at this moment, our application does not look that nice yet. So in the next video, we're going to be creating a nice looking navigation menu so that we can have a better way of navigating to different pages. And I will also show you how we can apply styling so that our components on the pages are going to look nice. I want to thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.